It's being hailed as the meeting of the might. And I'm talking about the meeting which is expected to take place later this afternoon in Ankara, Turkey. This is a meeting between Ukraine and Russia. The world is looking forward to this meeting. It's hoped that finally a truce will be reached that is expected to bring to an end the three-year grinding war which has brought the global supply chain to or thrown into a crisis. And of course, we're expecting the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, is expected to attend that meeting, and the world is waiting to see whether his counterpart from Russia, Vladimir Putin, will also make a show up. This is coming at a time when Donald Trump, the US president, is also in the Middle East, signing major deals with Syria as well as Saudi Arabia. Is he expected to swing by? That is the expectation, but we are waiting to see. This is BizCheck, where we go global, and even we come back to local as well as domestic issues. This is BizCheck, and we are live from Broadcasting House. My name is O'Brien Kimani. We are keeping an eye on what is happening in Ankara because it is going to have a ramification on a number of issues, from food supply chains and, of course, to global energy prices. And that's why the meeting is very, very important. I told you we're coming to you live from Broadcasting House, and of course today we also want to focus on another critical national issue, and that is the budget. Oh yeah, remember the budget day is coming up on the 12th of June, and that's where all the East African countries are expected to present their estimates. And of course, in Kenya, National Treasury Cabinet Secretary John Mbandi is expected to table these estimates before the House. What are the numbers saying, and who are the faces behind the numbers? I have a team of experts in the House who are going to guide us in this conversation. And of course, remember today, the former Deputy President, Rigathi Gachagua, is launching his party, and he's doing things in Lavington. Yes, and we have our reporter, Hashim, there. He's a good man. He'll be keeping us updated on what's happening there. And of course, our reporters are also on the ground, and so we shall be dashing from here to there just to get an update of what is happening. We need to get to the point. And of course, at O'Brien Kimani is my X handle. At KBC Channel 1 is our national Twitter handle, if you like it, X. We need to go straight into the conversation. I told you we're discussing figures, faces, and of course the numbers and the people involved. That's right. I'm joined by Victor Lekaram. He's an economist as well as the Director of Planning at the Office of the Government Spokesperson. He's joining us here so that he can help us unpack the numbers. Thank you very much indeed, Victor, for joining us.
Thank you, Brian.
Just next to Victor, on his left side, we have Helen Achieng. She's a tax manager at Ernst & Young. She's also joining us here this morning. Thank you, Achieng.
Thank you, Brian.
And next to Achieng, we have Stephen Mwakesi. He's a policy as well as governance expert. He's joining us this morning so that he can give it that policy face. Thank you very much indeed, Mwakesi, for joining us. First of all, before we delve deep, I just want to hear from Victor Lekaram. The government is planning to spend 4.3 trillion Kenya shillings, from the 1st of July to the 30th of June 2026. This is a 10% increase from the 3.9 that the government is spending in the current financial year. What are your thoughts around this?
Yes, first and foremost, the government must always spend money, and it does this to offer a variety of services, also to regulate a lot of industries within the country, but the main issue is to provide services to the Kenyans. Why is the budget increasing? And this is because, as you might be aware, the economy is also growing. Our GDP has also grown from 15 trillion to 16 trillion. So it is very, it is in order, or it is, looking at it in that way, you will notice that even as the economy grows, the government spending also grows as the economy also grows, because the economy is also giving more output. Yes.
Yes, Achieng. What are your thoughts on the 2025-2026 budget estimates?
Well, like what Victor has just said, I think the spending is what is very critical for us to look at, especially in this budget, because looking back at the previous years, we've just seen the spending increasing, and with that increased expenditure comes with a lot of increase in taxes, and I think we witnessed the impact of increasing those taxes in the previous financial year, which was not very good for the country, you know. And there's a lot of discussion about, is government able to reduce expenditure in the coming years, you know, how can we do this as a country so that year on year we don't end up having deficits that need to be financed through debt, etc. And so that is something that is a very critical point of discussion currently for us as a country, because if we try and manage our expenditure, then I think we will be able to grow from there, especially also from a tax perspective, as what we are currently seeing right now. So for me, that's a very interesting topic for discussion, and I'm glad that it's very alive right now. So we are just currently waiting to see on 12th, like you have said, what these expenditures would be all about. I know they released the policy statement recently, and they said about what they are going to be focusing on, so we're just waiting to see the numbers currently.
Very well. Mwakesi.
O'Brien, thank you. I appreciate being called here to speak to Kenyans about what we are seeing. I think in Parliament the budget was laid out, the expected expenditures of this current administration for the financial year 25-26. And it's a whooping 4.24 trillion, right? Out of that, I think 58% goes to the national government. So it's 60-40. 9% goes to counties.
County governments.
And we have about 31% going to paying what we call consolidated fund services. And this is where we have pensions and debt and interest that we're paying, amounting to almost $1 trillion. So I think in as much as we're seeing the huge amounts in 4.24 trillion, I think the biggest worry we should be asking ourselves, are we doing enough to cut down our expenditures, considering the increasing amount of debt and interest that we're paying on the debts that we do have? And are we also doing enough to make sure that we are doing enough to support the counties? Because at only 9% of the total expenditure that is expected in this year, financial year, there's still a lot that's being kept in the national government, and that means a lot less money is going into the counties and percolating to some of these services that are meant to be executed by counties. So those are some of the key concerns that we should really be asking ourselves. And is the national government doing enough to trim? Because we've seen headlines that are talking about renovations and things like this that are making Kenyans to be a bit perturbed by the question of is there enough austerity within government to ensure that Kenya does live within its means, so that we can be able to take care of the debt burden that we already have, but also make sure that the services that Kenyans crave for, health, education, water and sanitation, these are things that can be easily provided by the national government without having to put too much of a strain, and not needing later on in the year, in the financial year, to look for supplementary budget or even to increase the taxation levels that have because we are not able to meet, or even have to go and look for more external loans to cover our expenditure. So it's an expenditure problem, an expenditure question, and I hope we answer that here. Yeah.
And of course, we shall be going, delving deeper into the question of a budget absorption, you know, which has always been a big challenge, and especially with line ministries. But I just want to hear from Acheng. Mwakesi is bringing in the issue of debt. And when you look at the estimates, the government is planning to spend about 1.37 trillion Kenya shillings, you know, on debt obligations. And this is a significant chunk. This is how many times more than what counties are being allocated? Almost 3 times more than what counties are getting. You see, when you look at the debt management strategy, it talks about, you know, reducing the deficit to below 5%. Now we're looking at almost 5.7%. Do you feel the government is doing enough to deal with budgetary deficits?
Well, first of all, let me say that we are trying, but we are not yet there. And this issue of debt has been, again, a topic of discussion for a really long time, especially with last year, what we saw, the debt expenditure was very high, yeah, and up to almost even, I don't know the exact figures, but up to 18%, you know. And there've been a lot of discussions around, is our debt expense too high? Are we paying too much on servicing loans, you know? And maybe just to give a background, you see, when we have, especially last year, we did not have the finance bill. And so there was no opportunity for government to raise revenue through taxes, as we've seen being trend in the previous financial years, right? And so this time we had to go towards borrowing, and of course this debt has to be financed in a way. And the reason why our debt is currently so high is because even the interest rates thereof are very high. And I think this is why you'll see financial sector really outperformed itself in the last financial year. I think they were one of the two sectors that grew over 5%. If you look at the previous reports that we just received, which shows that the debt, or rather the interest rates in the country and also globally are currently very high, which then increase our debt obligation. So what I'm seeing is a situation where if we can manage our debt very clearly, and again, we don't have to borrow. We go back to the issue of spending. Do we really need this money? You know, do we have to spend on, you know, he's talked about extravagant expenditure that is not being targeted toward the core resources. Do we really need to borrow this money to finance ourselves? As a country, are we able to rely on the little that we have in order to push the economy that, that we want in the future? So for me, I think we have not yet done enough in terms of reducing debt. It keeps on increasing, you know, even the debt ceiling keeps increasing. We've not seen this kind of rates in the previous financial years. And so there's still a lot of room for improvement for us as a country in terms of debt management, in my opinion, you know. And again, going back to the tax effect, some money has to be provided to finance this debt. Where will that money come from? Do we go back to borrowing? Or do we now look at other avenues of trying to reduce this expenditure without necessarily having to borrow more funds? Because it's actually a problem for government. We are seeing reports of pending bills, etc. So it's really not a good picture, because a lot of our money actually goes towards debt financing. Yeah.
And I like the fact that you're bringing in the issue, you know, of pending bills. I mean, there has been an animal. It has been an elephant in the room, and especially for the private sector and the business community. And but before we talk about that, I want to hear this from Lekaram. Budget deficits, you know, has always been a thorn in government's flesh. The situation is not looking any better now. From where you see it as an economist, are there areas that you feel or that you see opportunities where government can undertake hairline cuts to ensure that we live within our means?
Yes, thank you for that question, O'Brien. Just to set the matter straight. Yes, when this government took over, we were in a very tight fiscal space. You know, trying to juggle in between paying debt, providing services, you know, in a background, in a backdrop of, you know, international, you know, strife, you know, especially looking at the global supply chain on things like grain, and, you know, at this time, the cost of, you know, basic commodities like unga went to almost 250 shillings. Even with then, just at the end of the previous regime, even with subsidies, still we could not get unga at 180 shillings. And right now, we are doing unga maybe 2 kg at 130 shillings. And that is because of deliberate
but that is not a sign of development.
No, I know this, but it provides, you know, homes with affordable food. This is a guarantee of the Constitution of Kenya.
But I just want to pick you on that before you even proceed.
Yes.
I mean, and I think this is something that we need to discuss as a country. Yes. It is high time we stop talking about, you know, the cost of unga, because that is looking at it from, you know, from a very simplistic point of view. Yes. I want to give you an example. For example, Switzerland. You know, a cup of tea in Switzerland will cost you about 400 shillings, Kenya shillings. The same here will cost you maybe 50 shillings. But you never hear people complaining about a cup of tea in Switzerland. Why?
Yes.
It's because they have money in their pocket. And so it is high time that we moved from looking at the cost of unga, but asking ourselves, how do we put money in people's pocket to ensure that they're not very much concerned about the cost of unga? Please continue.
Brian, when I'm talking about unga, I'm not talking about the price of unga. I'm talking about the cost of living, affordable cost of living. 70% of all homes in Kenya, staple food is unga. So I'm just using this as an indicator of the affordability of, food. So going back to your question on what we can do. So this aspect, this is known as, for economists, as fiscal consolidation. And here we are trying to ensure that the government operates within a very lean budget. So by this, I'm looking at, ensuring that our public debt does not go off limit. Limiting government deficit so that we just borrow for development, like for the first time in this, the next financial year budget. KRA is set to raise almost 2.8 trillion, and both the current and capital estimates of the budget is around 2.5 trillion. So it means for the very first time, if we are ever going to do any borrowing as a government, it will be only for development, unlike in the past, whereby we had to look up to IMF for budget support. But for the very first time, this is not going to happen.
Have we ever borrowed for recurrent?
For budget support, yes.
Recurrent expenditure?
Yes.
Which year was that?
No, we have done that previously for budget support using IMF. And if, for example, Kenya is a signatory to IMF, we usually have a facility that we are accorded to as a nation for, anytime we have economic turbulence. Sometimes maybe we need to strengthen maybe our foreign reserves and things like that, yes.
And that facility has been there since the year 2020?
Yes, it has been there, yes.
But I still want to hear from you. And I like the fact that you appreciate the measures that the government is putting in place to ensure that we operate within our physical framework.
Yes.
And I know there has been a lot of conversations around fiscal realignment and fiscal consolidations. And this would be expected that it will have some impact on the budget deficit, but apparently it's not having. Are we doing the wrong fiscal consolidation, or we are not addressing the elephant in the room?
Yes, I think to be fair to this government, I think we are heading in the right direction. There's been a lot of concerted effort towards, things like e-procurement, elimination of foreign travels, reduction of budget lines in areas like, subsistence allowance, refurbishment also. And these are deliberate things to ensure that now we really concentrate on the on priority spending for the government. Yes, this has happened. If you asked anybody who's working for this government, they tell you life is tough in this government, like there's no money. But this is because we are directing money to the right places. Yes.
Mwakesi, Lekaram is talking about fiscal consolidations and, of course, realignments within government to ensure that we achieve the medium-term strategy budget deficit requirement. Do you see enough efforts being done to ensure that we achieve that?
I'm not really impressed, and I say this with a lot of respect to all the planners in government. I still feel that there are terminologies that are being bandied around. If you listen to the PS for finance, he would speak of, we've cut down on travel expenditure, and we're telling people, but we're going to be using Zoom and things like that. And I know they sound like they're making sense, yeah? But the entirety of the travel expenditure budget is not as significant as the amount of waste we have on either pumping in projects that are headed nowhere, coming up with new projects all the time, inordinate procurement, right? You'd have supplies that are being delivered to government offices that have really no need to be supplied to government offices. This is what the president said that he would really clamp down on. So there's still significant waste being done. A lot of projects being conjured mid-budget that are suddenly called to be of emergency that need to be taken care of. We have also, when you look at the current recurrent expenditure documents, you'll find the budget lines which don't make absolutely any sense. There's an executive office of the president receiving X billions, right, of money, and then there is State House receiving X billion of money. And you're wondering, why would you have two budget lines? Like, I would expect that is State House operating on a different framework from the executive office of the president? There are personnel emoluments which are being paid. People are being paid salaries in that vote line of executive office of the president, and there's also salaries being paid on State House. And it's this kind of discordance, and when you go into an itemized consideration of the budget lines that are being provided by the state, and you realize there are a lot of opportunities for wastage that should actually be cut down. I know government is a monster, and I've seen it. I've sat in a cabinet meeting where the president, Uhuru Kenyatta, attempted to cut down on budget lines, and that was only during that retreat, and when the people came back to Nairobi, things went on business as usual. And this is the problem that we have in this government framework, because we do have the right intent, we have the right policy people speaking that we are clamping down, we are consolidating. But in the end, when you get into that procurement portal, everything that was procured in last financial year is still going to be done in this financial year. So there's waste. And we are not cutting down to the way Kenyans expect us to do. It's very unfortunate, right? And it's sad that Kenyans have to be treated. If you watch numerous interviews, and I'm speaking something that all Kenyans are doing right now, if you look at all the top line government officials, especially at Treasury, when they go into these TV shows and they're being asked the hard questions, what are you doing renovating State House, right? When we are having problems with XYZ, you're saying you don't have enough money for capitation for JSS, you don't have enough money for universities, you don't have money for help. What are you doing renovating State House? What is Kenyatta National Hospital doing with almost 20 billion? That's almost 3 times what my county gets to cater for the population of an entire county of Taita Taveta. What is a national hospital holding that much money for? Like, it doesn't make...
But also it's good to realize that Kenyatta National Hospital is not just your ordinary hospital. These are hospitals that caters...
And it's a referral
for regional patients.
But do you know how you handle health outcomes? You handle health outcomes at the very basic level. From the point where you're dealing it from a community health worker perspective all the way up. By the time it reaches Kenyatta National Hospital, it should be a referral of the most serious cases. So we should not be expecting influenza being treated at Kenyatta National Hospital and having the same level of, and while our level 2, level 3, level 4 are all underfunded, and counties will tell you that as a fact.
But
all the
for
hospitals
me,
are underfunded.
with all due respect, I mean, the question we should be even be asking ourselves is, 20 billion shillings, is it even enough for KNH? Before we even say, why is KNH having 20 billion? Is 20 billion shillings enough for KNH?
But what I'm saying to you, O'Brien, is that look at the 2010 Constitution, which was called a liberal constitution. The point was that we want to devolve all of these things to the lowest level possible. Health outcomes are really tackled best when they are dealt with at the point of incidence. When you are talking about pumping significant resources to a national referral hospital, a singular referral hospital, right, chewing up money that's almost double or triple what some county governments are receiving to cater for an entire population outlay, right? At the point of dispensary all the way, and also catering for salaries and development of water and every other thing. That tells you there's a problem in the system. So what am I saying? I don't have a problem with Kenyatta National Hospital receiving this much money, but we need to cut waste and we need to transfer money to where it is needed most. When we entrap some of these high amounts of money in some of these facilities. And I'll go back to what I opened with. I still don't understand why the national government is receiving 58% of the entire monies that we're getting when we were doing the budget construction, right? Parliament gets 1%, judiciary 0.something%. The rest is held up in the national government. that tells you that it's almost 6 times what counties are receiving in their totality to run their entire affairs. So there's a discrepancy somewhere, and we need to fix it. And the reason why the national government is kept this superfluously large is because there's a lot of waste that's not being cut down. And I still believe that if we went line by line, as Kenyans, and you gave us one day here, 48 hours, to kuja hapa, like serious experts on governance, and we took the PS and CS of Treasury and went line by line, and as Kenyans ask him, why is this one here? And I can guarantee you, by the time we leave here, that thing will move from 2.4 trillion as an expenditure of the national government to something like 1.7, and Kenyans will be fine. And we will actually put money to where it matters most. You asked.
I can see Achieng is concerned about that statement. Achieng, what do you want to say?
And before you even finish that, let me also say this, and, I'm here to be corrected by my brother here, Victor.
Yes. I mean, this is a learning platform.
Yes.
I mean,
so I might say
to
some things that may not be incorrect, but I want also to just put it in into context. This economy, as I understand it, is heavily running on agriculture, is heavily running on tourism, and is heavily running on services.
Yeah.
When you look at that, surely our expenditures must reflect that. But when you look at what is being spent on agriculture, it's not even nearly sufficient. Now, when you look at when you speak of services,
it's about 9% of
9%,
the entire budget.
What we're looking at spending on services, and remember, the anchoring thing for services is essentially education, right? We need to spend a huge amount of money on education. Of course, Mandarins will tell you 659 to almost 700 billion in education is a lot of money even to start with. Yes, I think you should push it to 1 trillion and make sure that all the money that's sent there is extremely efficient. Then we come to this part of tourism. You look at the allocation for tourism. It's almost 11 or something billion going into the State Department for tourism. So it tells you that even as we brag about this economy being the 6th largest in Africa because we beat some 2 countries, Ethiopia and I think Angola, now we're bragging about this, but we are not even having a budget that's really catering to these particular lines of or sectors of the economy that are fundamentally meant to spur the economic growth that we want to see. Right?
I want you to hold your thoughts at that point, because I want Achieng, I want you to respond to what he's raising. Like, are we really putting our money where our mouth is? And are we really living within our means? And do we have the discipline, the financial discipline, to ensure that every coin that we earn, goes into the right place? I want you to respond to that.
Well, Brian, thank you for that. And my direct answer would be no, because I do agree with him that while we have allocations for different sectors of the economy, we are seeing a lot of priority on things that are actually not of priority being allocated. For instance, you would find, and I'll use a very good example of agriculture, tourism, So these are very underfunded sectors of the economy in terms of the budget, And these are things that, we've seen promises being made that we are trying to revive the tourism sector in Kenya. We are trying to revive the agricultural sector in Kenya, but the money that is being put into these sectors is not very sufficient in our opinion. And like it said, it's very worrying that 58% of our budget is going towards the national government, because we've seen time and time again that where this money, let's say for example, they allocate it for development, infrastructural development, capital expenditure, some of these projects we are not seeing it. And interestingly enough, while our GDP grew, I know a lot of people are talking about we are doing good as a country, taking into consideration COVID. Kenyans are complaining that there's not enough money in their pockets, We are not seeing this money circulating in the economy. So how is the GDP growing, but we are not seeing this funding? Someone would go to a hospital. We've seen instances of that. They're not able to get the services that they require. Agriculture is suffering. We're seeing the sugar industry. So ideally, the priority should be on the very important sectors that would drive growth in Kenya, as opposed to recurrent expenditure and spending on things that do not really add value to our economy. And maybe something that I would also add is, even if this expenditure is allocated, let's just for benefit of doubt, we are seeing reasonable allocations. Kenyans are not able to see the effect or the impact, the positive impact of these allocations in that regard.
I want us to get statistical here a little bit. I mean, forgive us if we get boring, because I know the numbers are not very interesting. But let's look at how the government is planning to spend the 4.3 trillion Kenya shillings in the next 12 months. So the national government will get about 2.5 trillion shillings. That is this is up by almost 300 billion shillings from what it's receiving now, from 2.3. Then the Parliament will get 49 billion Kenya shillings. That is 49.5. The judiciary will get 26.75. The Consolidated Services Fund will get 1.369. And county governments will get about 4.5 billion Kenya shillings. Lekaram, what do you make of these numbers? If you are in charge of developing the national budget for this country, would you allow the figures to remain the same? Would you rearrange them? If yes, how would you rearrange them?
Yes. First of all, in the division of revenue, there are different things that you have to look at. And one of them is the institutional bodies which are given this mandate. Yes. County governments are supposed to get a certain percentage, not less than 15% of the last audited financial statements. So that is something I'll have to look at. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, we usually have those expenditures that are fast charge. One of them is, like debt repayments. Yeah. Salaries, pending bills. I will start with that. Mm-hmm. Then I will move on to complete the ongoing projects. Even before I start a new project, I'll ensure that the rest of them, the ongoing programs that are continuing must be implemented. But looking at this, I'll be operating in a political environment whereby people have a functioning government, mm-hmm. and they expect so much of them. They've been given the mandate. I'd really like to balance this, and by this, I look at the current government and really see how I can incorporate the plan. And the plan that I'm talking about is the better plan, the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. And here I will look at the fundamentals, especially those that are looking at expanding the economy, those that improve trade, mm-hmm. infrastructure,
and this will be
improving
like
the infrastructure. Mm. Yes, I will put money there. Mm-hmm. And when I look at
which are these sectors?
These sectors, I will put I will put like in agriculture and manufacturing, mm-hmm. especially so that I could create more jobs, build up the value chains, and develop higher value industries, and to ensure that we're able to transform Kenya from an importing economy to an exporting economy. By this, I will also like to leverage on digital infrastructure. And have economic activities that significantly boost productivity. Then I will look at if people have the facilities and infrastructure to conduct business. I'll look at markets, having interventions that reduce the business costs, mm-hmm. so that now we can, appreciate higher value from our normal day-to-day activities.
Let me, for example,
yes.
I want to hear this. You're saying you'd allocate more fundings to more critical and priority areas.
Yes.
Let's, for example, take agriculture and food security. It's getting about 44 billion Kenya shillings.
Yes.
Then you look at roads, it's getting 190 billion shillings. Then you look at national security. It's 425 billion shillings. And then you have education sector at 659, or let's say 660. Then manufacturing and industrialization. Manufacturing, yes. and industrialization is getting 18 billion shillings. Equity, poverty reduction, women and youth empowerment, 107 billion shillings.
Yes.
At the same time, you're giving manufacturing and industrialization. Yet remember, you know, our midterm strategy as a country is to increase the contribution of manufacturing to GDP from the current 9% to about 15% by the year 2027.
Yes.
Do you see a mismatch here?
Yes, O'Brien. I'm not shocked by these figures. I think they're in order. And why I would justify this is that I would not put 300 billion there for manufacturing because, number one, as I said, I will look at what space we're operating with, what kind of resources do we have, what kind of revenues do we have. But really, also remember that this sector is private driven, okay? Most importantly, I would ensure that there is a favorable business climate for private businesses and enterprises to thrive. And by this, I will really look at the fundamentals to ensure that there's affordable credit, you know, streamlined processes that support this industry. That will have a much higher impact than if I would just, you know, like just set money aside and allocate it to a ministry. Yes. So when it comes to, you know, having interventions of government that are geared towards improvement of, you know, a sector critical as manufacturing and industrialization, then really I would look at expanding opportunities, just like in the current government, to ensure that even in the far to reach areas, you know, areas like Samburu, Turkana, Wajir, Mandera, there are opportunities for them to do value addition and create, you know, jobs at that level. So even the funds that you see there are mostly for the infrastructure to set up, you know, special economic zones and things like this. Yes.
Mwakesi, I want to hear this from you. I mean, you've been in this field of governance for quite a long time. So when we are setting 107 billion shillings for equity, poverty reduction, women and youth empowerment, what is that?
Look, Brian, I'll take what Victor said. I mean, governments operate in a political environment. And literally, what you've stated there is what we call the welfare part of the state. And that's where the government is spending money to make sure its populace feels they're supported by government in some way, shape, or form. And this is where you get your Women Fund, Wezo Fund, and even this other one that people complain about. But the point is, in as much as you put or allocate this much money, 107 billion, the more important, because the funny thing that we realize is that we've been pumping billions in this welfare sort of or social support programs, but we're not getting the returns of the investments that we're making. And 3/4 of the time, it's because, one, the people who are meant to receive these funds either do not have the capacity, and when they do, they have not been well trained in terms of understanding the importance of making sure that this money, in the event that you do not utilize it well, there is a punitive element to it. You've heard even, I think, the CS for social protection, I think, Oparanya, on TV or in Senate the other day, saying that he wasn't wrong when he was saying that when you get this money from government, you chew it, you know, you don't pay back. So it's been the thought that's been running, and we are still funding programs that are not making Kenyans realize that when we put this money directly in your hands or accessible to you at either low rates, when it's a loan, because some parts of Youth Fund, Women Fund, Wezo Funds are actually loans and not grants, you are meant to actually utilize them in a manner that's as you would if you were taking a normal proper bank loan. So when we fail to articulate this and make sure that it's very clear to our public, we end up losing this money. So this is 107 billion that if I was a serious planner within government, I already write it off. I know this is money I've put in Kencom and told people come and collect and go, right? So I will not even believe that it will actually have a significant impact on the economy. But there are probably data that will tell you this is actually doing something in the economy. And I have no doubt about that. However, I want to come to this point and say that in as much as we're looking at these numbers holistically, 107 billion, I think the purest that's actually going directly to utilization by people. But all of these other sector numbers, yeah, we need to always remember that out of this budget, only 1.7 trillion, only 700 billion, right, is actually going into development.
To development.
That's Miradi, so that to put it very clearly.
It's about 28% of the total budget.
Exactly. The rest is for recurrent expenditure.
And
so
the public finance
literally,
management talks about 30%,
yes,
at least 30%.
Yeah.
So we are failing on that.
We're failing on that. And it's a shame. And we shouldn't even talk about the least. We should be talking about, are we even at 50%? Because literally what you're telling me is that a program within manufacturing, a program within agriculture is doing the same thing that it has been doing all along. So if it's paying people salaries at, say, 14 or 15% of their total allocation of 400 billion, that's what it is going to. I will not fault teachers. I will not fault paying our workers in terms of health. But everything else is shocking what we are actually doing to actually start up development in this country. It's very low. So that tells you at our budget planning levels, and I know it could be the rigidity of the economy or the rigidity of our people in general, right? Because I know if a president woke up today and say, I want to cut the public service by X amount, I think that president should know he's going home tomorrow. I think those are the dynamics that governments have to work with. Yeah. However, there are mechanisms you can utilize to trim these things. Secondly, do not perpetuate these welfare programs to the extent that you're not making a return on investment. We need to have policymakers who are very strict on understanding when we are dishing out this free money, right? Because it's literally free money. We need to make sure our populace understands we are taking the hit of giving this money to you. Please use it wisely. But when we do not make that very clear to our populace, one, there will be an expectation. So let me tell you something. Whether you like it or not, whether Victor tomorrow wakes up in a good mood or a bad mood, he has to plan for how money is going into Wezo Fund and Youth Fund, whether he likes it or not, and whether it's making sense or not. So our politicians, our leaders, our president need to actually look at where we're spending 107 billion, right, on some of these programs. Can we make sure we make the populace aware that Mama Mboga, when you take this money, first make it available for real. It's a story that this money is available, and whenever they go to these offices, they're rejected and they're sent back. Right? They need to actually access this money. And when they do, they need to be very clear in their minds that they're paying it back. When you do that, you will not need to go and take more money to build houses. They will build their houses, right? You don't need to even increase any other thing of taxation because the economy will be able to be activated. But we're sinking 107 billion directly into people's pockets, but it's being chewed. And politicians are not taking the responsibility to say that this 107 billion must be used correctly. Number two, the managers of these funds.
Before you talk about
yes.
Point number two, yesterday we saw the MSME's development minister or cabinet secretary, Wycliffe Oparanya, appearing before the Senate yesterday. And the Senate was raising some very pertinent issues. This is in regard to the Hustler Fund.
Hustler Fund, yeah.
And the minister gave some very interesting figures. I mean, he said that out of the 50% of all the funds that has been lent is in default. In short, people are not paying back.
Yeah.
And he also said that majority of the people who are borrowing for their personal expenses. This was a noble idea by the government to ensure that people get micro loans to expand their businesses, the Mama Mboga, the border riders and all that. But it is not working the way it was intended. And so even as we expand or expend more resources, on the national welfare system, it is also high time that we started questioning, are the people that we are spending this money on, are they spending it the right way? Are they putting it into economic use? Because yes, you may borrow, but you're borrowing for what? Please continue.
Yeah, and you've really brought out the point that I was trying to make. The point is, aside from the areas where we are really supporting our elderly, our vulnerable, like the orphans and the disabled, all of these other monies, as they're set aside, they need to be put to people. And Kenyans need to actually learn and be taught by their leaders that when we give this money to you, this is what we expect that you do with it. The moment we do not change that narrative in politics, it does not matter even if you change the current administration and put in a new one. We are going to be losing 107 billion, give or take, or even half of that every year to just people's pockets to do absolutely nothing for just consumption.
Very
and
well.
that is not a way to grow an economy. So my thinking and my view as we look through this budget, I'm sure there are a lot of politicians, especially in parliament, who will say, increase on that. In fact, 107 is too little. Let's take it to 200.
Let's take it to
yeah,
200.
let's do it, because we're going into an electionary year, and things like that
In
will
about
happen.
2 years' time.
Yeah, but instead, we should utilize these allocations to make sure that we really do spur the private sector that he's talking about, and to make that Mama Mboga be considered a really formal private sector player. So we can only do that.
This is where
by
the
being
government comes
intentional.
in and partner with private sectors to entrench civic education. Because I might give you money, yes, but do you know why you need? Do you need this money really in the first place? Do you understand why you need this money in the first place? Are you going to put this money in the right place? Because the Hustler Fund is such a brilliant idea. But if civic education is not carried for people to understand, yes, this is not free money, this is not free lunch. This is money that I'm supposed to use and invest in a business that is going to help create returns. But I don't think that is happening at this point. And I'm hoping that the government will take it up and ensure that happens. But I want to hear this from Helen. You see, and this is a conversation that we need to have as a country. The allocation to Parliament is 42 billion shillings. 42 billion shillings. 41.1 is going to recurrent. This is both the Senate and the National Assembly. And they have a development expenditure of 1.4 billion shillings. I want to hear from you, should we be spending 42 billion shillings to sustain those two institutions? Then when you look at the judiciary, the allocation here is 26 billion shillings. Out of this, 23 billion will go towards recurrent. This is paying suppliers, paying workers, judges, and so much. And 2 billion shillings has been earmarked for development. Allow me to give some context here. When you look at the number of, when you look at the backlog, the case backlog at the judiciary, you're talking about almost 300,000 cases, okay, that are pending. Why? Because there are not enough judicial officers, there are not enough judges, we don't have enough courts. But we are allocating 2 billion shillings to a critical arm of the government, like the judiciary, for expenditure. Really, is there a mismatch here?
Well, ideally, judiciary is a very core, let me start with the judiciary before I go to Parliament, is a very core government arm in our country. And like you've rightfully said, very critical, you know, in terms of determination of disputes that are currently in court. And for sure, Brian, I would tell you the judiciary has been struggling for quite some time because, you know, there's a lot of training sessions that have to go into, you know, a lot of expenditure that is usually incurred in the delivery of justice in our courts. And for a long time, we've been saying that the judiciary has actually been underfunded. And this is the time that we are seeing more focus on the judiciary arm of the government, at least in terms of expenditure, so that we get the independence of the judiciary that we really need. So for it to be allocated that amount of money, for me, I really don't have a problem with it because it's long overdue. And like you've rightfully said, there are places in this country that still do not have courts. If they have courts, they only have lower courts, you know, they don't have high courts. And so you see a lot of cramping of cases in one particular court, and that ideally infringes on the right to access justice for our citizens of Kenya, you know. So at least for the judiciary, if they receive allocation, especially for development, etc., it works. And then, you know, the judiciary is a very large arm of government. We have a lot of court employees, etc., from the judges, from the clerks, from the people who run the government. So in that regard, that is still fine. But in terms of the parliament, you see, and that brings us to the question that all Kenyans usually ask: is it really necessary? What are these expenses? What are these recurrent expenses that parliament has to is incurring that would cause us to spend this much money? Because if you look at the very things that they want to spend on, probably they're not even important, or rather maybe they're important, but in terms of the order of priority of what we need to focus on, it really falls to the bottom of the page. They're not among the top 5. Exactly, they're not top 5. So why should we have this allocation here as opposed to increasing it? Like we've talked about the SMEs, which is actually, let me tell you, the statistics show that the informal job sector grew the most in this current financial year, as at the reports as at December, which shows you that a lot of people are becoming more industrious in the informal sector. So why don't we put this money there? Because time and time again, like what is Parliament going to spend on new that they have not already been allocated for in the previous budgets? So for me, judiciary is very core, very important, and the legislative arm is also very important, but we really need to look at what is this expenditure for. And again, as Kenyans, visibility is very important, because if you tell someone that you're allocating this much money to Parliament, and at the end of the day, they cannot see money in their pockets, they are borrowing from the Hustler Fund, but they're not borrowing, they're borrowing as a form of, you know, actually there's a lot of misconception that this Hustler Fund is your money. They don't really know how to put. Why don't we channel that to civic education? Why don't we channel that to SMEs in terms of enlightening them on how they can actually sustain themselves with the funding that they receive? So for me, it really does not make sense. And this is why I usually say this zero-based budgeting that has been talked about for time, it's long overdue. We need to see exactly what Parliament wants to spend this money on, so that at least we say, okay, fine, this is the allocation that you receive. And you know, zero-based budgeting is where you receive allocation based on actual expenses and not because of prior year, you know, precedents, how you spend in the previous financial year. So we really need to look at what we are spending on as a country.
From where you stand, I mean, who should get more between Parliament and the judiciary in terms of allocation?
Yeah, I'm a bit biased, to be honest, but for me, it's the judiciary. Because the judiciary, really, the functions of the judiciary are very core in our country. And if you look at the number of judiciary officers that we have in the country currently, I think it's more than 3 times or 4 times the number that we have. So in terms of recurrent expenditure, I think the judiciary spends more compared to Parliament. But of course, I know Robert is here, sorry, rather Victor is here. They can actually give more insights on that. But for me, it's really the judiciary. Very well.
Let me come to Victor. And you know, she's saying that she's biased. You know, judiciary should get more. But when you look at the budget policy statement, you know, Parliament has been allocated 42.5 billion shillings, which is a reduction of 7 billion shillings from the 2025 BPS. The judiciary has been allocated 26.7 billion, which is a reduction of 87 million shillings, is a reduction here. There is an animal here that is called the National Government Constituency Development Fund. I know it has raised a lot of dust, and I know there's an ongoing public participation process to really understand whether we need this to be domiciled at the National Assembly, at the National Parliament, or what. We are talking about 58.8 billion shillings allocated to this fund. Victor, what is your thought on this?
Well, yes, CDF is a national government fund. It has an act that is there. Well, we've had a lot of people move to courts to challenge the existence of this fund, but that is an ongoing process.
Yes.
They've been given some time to make sure this fund is aligned to the Constitution, and I think they are working towards that. Whether the fund should be there or not, I think the fund should be there, only that the management of the fund then should be left to the executive. That is what, I mean, according to the Act. Yes, so...
The executive?
Yes, the major issue has been the role of, you know, our legislators in this fund, because they're supposed to do oversight and not actually...
Not management.
Management of this fund.
But now
that is actually the issue. But on what CDF does in terms of, you know, providing bursaries, you know, building of classrooms, providing infrastructure to the national government securities, I don't have a problem with that, because that is actually, when CDF is funded, then these same funds are not there in the votes of the entities that are there. If we can do it in a better way to include the counties, why not?
So this money goes into building schools?
Yes, national government functions, yes. Like
So
in
why
my
can
area,
this money be given to the Ministry of Education, for example? Because it is the one in charge of education.
yes, yes, but you know,
Isn't this like some form of wastage that, you know, Mokesi is talking about?
I don't know whether you'll
Or
term it-
duplication.
I don't know whether you'll term it wastage, because some of the best projects that I've seen being highlighted in the social media, actually projects from CDF. I've seen, you know, in some constituencies, you know, very good projects, schools.
I replace the word wastage with duplication.
Duplication. Yes. You know, the issue of development is very localized.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, the offices, the state departments, they're usually based in Nairobi, whereas development is required at a much lower level, where public participation and even the input of the citizens and, you know, their needs are better handled at that lower level.
Very good. I know that's is a hot political issue.
Yes, it is.
And
Yes.
it's a very politically sensitive issue.
Yes.
And I know at this point, I mean, you know, at this level, we cannot deal with that. But those are some of the conversations that we need to be engaging in. I mean, if the role of NGCDF is to construct schools, then can we empower the Ministry of Education to do that job? Because that's their responsibility anyway. If this fund is going to construct police stations, then can we empower the Ministry of Interior to do this instead of having another fund to do this? I want you, Mwakesi, to respond once we come back, because we have to pay some bills, and of course I take a short break so that we need to breathe. All right. So, I mean, if you're just joining us, we're having some great conversation here with two gentlemen and a lady here, and we are focusing on the 2025-2026 national budget, and of course, looking at critical issues. This only happens on BizCheck. My name is O'Brien Kim, and we are taking a short break, and thereafter, we are coming back to unpack more for you. Stay right here. Welcome back. You're watching BizCheck live from our national headquarters here in KBC, Nairobi. My name is O'Brien Kimani, and of course, this morning we are having a great conversation around the national budget, which is coming up before the House on the 12th of June this year. And of course, we're also keeping an eye on what is happening in Turkey, where two powers, that is Russia and Ukraine, are expected to meet to discuss a possible truce that is expected to end the long 3-year war, which has somehow disrupted the global supply chain, especially food and energy. And this is expected to have a major impact on developing economies like Kenya. We also have our reporters who are spread all over the country and, of course, are tracking the happenings there. But now let's come back to the studio because I can see it's 11:05. And in the studio, we have Victor Lekaram. He's an economist as well as a director of planning at the Office of the Government Spokesperson. We also have Helena Cheng, who is a tax manager at Ernst & Young, and Stephen Mwakesi, who is a policy as well as governance expert, joining me on the set here so that they can give this conversation, some perspective. Before we went for the break, Mwakesi, I could see you were burning, with the passion. You wanted to respond on the issue of the NGCDF. It's a very sensitive issue. I mean, it is domiciled at the National Assembly. No conversations are currently ongoing to really respond to the question whether members of parliament should be managing funds. Yes, their role, one of their roles, critical role or core role is oversight, but should they be given powers also to manage funds? Or should we give these funds to county government, to the national government, to line ministries for them to manage? I want to hear your thoughts on this.
So thank you, Brian. I'll try not to also antagonize my people in Taita Taveta who will ask me, why am I fighting CDF?
Yes.
But I think it's a fundamental question about how do we want governance to be structured in this country. Now, first thing, I want to say there's a lot of mischief when you see in the budget that previous allocation was 68 billion, now it's 58 billion. They have cut it down by 10 billion. I am sure by the end of this budget cycle, it will be back to 68 or even enhanced to 72. But the question is, why is the National Treasury budgeting for something that the courts have outrightly said is not in accordance with the Constitution? So that's a problem right there. It's a big red flag. They shouldn't have budgeted for it, right?
And then go to the same parliament for approvals.
As we speak, parliament is attempting to go back to Kenyans and tell them, please help us to put CDF as anchored, to be anchored in the Constitution. So it's not even there. It shouldn't even be a line within the budget, but it is there. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the political class and the national government thinks that it's in their political best interest to keep NCDF still alive as we wait for the constitutional approval. Here, but there's the question that you are asking, but why should MPs be doing this? This is what I'd like to counter. My view, I would naturally, if I was to stand before Parliament and Senate, I'd tell them, look, I would really appreciate if you chose to take that money, not the whole 58, add yourselves probably an additional 10 billion, but create a very clear framework for oversight of the national government, the judiciary, and all other independent bodies. Because the thing that's making us really not go forward as a country is because we keep pumping 4 trillion into the economy as an expenditure, right? But we're not really sure where this money is going. And because Parliament is so happy to receive 58 billion, to go and brag with at the villages and to tell their people, hey, nimewajengea choo namna hii, nimewatengenezea, there's a police station I have built, so now I need security is here. Instead of saying that if I made sure that the amount of money I've sent to the Ministry of Education that is targeted, because Parliament in the last report to the National Treasury asked it to make sure that all the allocations that they are making, right, within the budget are geographically aligned, so that an MP can sit and say, all of these national government projects that are happening within my constitution, I know each one of them and where they fall within the budget of Kenya. So the key question an MP should be asking themselves is, can Parliament empower me to be able to know that all the monies that I have approved to go into my constituency actually go there, instead of running around so that you can spend 150 million in a financial year, and half of it is all Kenyans know disappears into other things other than the actual things that is happening. So we need to really empower. And for me, I feel 42 or 45 billion and as an allocation to the parliament is too little for a country that has 50 million people. I think we need to spend a lot more, right, for parliament to have the right kind of teeth to oversight the government. Same goes for the Auditor General, same goes for the Controller of Budget. These are institutions that need to be really empowered to ensure that all the monies that are being sent out there, whether it's to the county governments, whether it's being sent to the national government ministry, line ministries and sagas, all that money is spent as intended. If we could do that, we could have a transformation for the country. But like I said, CDF is a patronage fund. It is a fund for the people to remember who is the boss. It's for a fund for the people to get back re-elected because development is measured in funny metrics like issuance of bursary. There are very laudable initiatives within Bunge that are saying, collapse all these bursary funds, put them in the Ministry of Education, and make sure kids go to school for free. Why would you need to be writing checks? It's even a waste of paper that every single financial year an MP is sitting down to write I don't know how many checks to schools when that money could be everyone who's going to secondary school, it's free because all that money has been sent to the schools. So we need to be asking ourselves, are these parliamentarians taking the time to ensure that the capitation that they send to the schools actually works? The monies that they send to police to build police stations is actually used as intended, but instead politicians want to be construction engineers, right? And have say over tenders and things like that. We need to change this country from being leaders who drive tendering processes. Leaders need to be ones who ensure that once they receive resources, they're utilized as per the wishes of the people. And that's my call. Finally, I'd echo what she said, Helen said, about the amount of money we're allocating to the judiciary. We need more. Kenya is number 6 in the continent, right, in terms of GDP. We are a strong economy. One of the key pillars that has helped this country remain that strong is our very strong judicial system. That I know if I go and I get aggrieved because somebody has taken my tender and refused to pay me, if I take them to court, the judicial system in Kenya ensures that I get paid. You try that in DRC. It's chaos. You will get a judgment even after 4 years, and no one is talking to you. You don't even know when the judge will show up. Sometimes judges run away because they're afraid for their own safety. In this country, we are recognized as a pillar of the continent, as was said by the remarks by the Finnish president, because we have a judicial system that works. Now, it's shocking that Martha Koome is able to run a judiciary with the kind of allocations that we're giving her. She needs more. And if we give her more, there will be less disagreements. People will not even attempt to con you. Because right now, people are able to do all manner of criminality because the judicial system is so constrained. Justice. Yes, it's so constrained.
If you were given powers to reallocate,
yes,
where would you reallocate and give judiciary more?
I would definitely take back the government to only, the executive would take up 50%. The 8 I would split 4-4 to the
counties.
4% goes to
judiciary,
to the judiciary, and some to the parliament. Of course, I'll also slash even more when we actually become real about taking the constitutional transfer of functions. And I'll be shocked. You'll have a president who should be comfortable working with around 40% of the total budget, not the current 58. It's very important that we send these monies to where it is needed. Let me explain why it's important to send money to the counties so that in closing that is very clear. The challenge that we have when we do not send, when we only send 9% of our total expenditure to counties, instead of, say, for example, 18 or 19%, the problem is that we concentrate procurement in Nairobi. So can you imagine all that expenditure, 58%, will be controlled in Nairobi. When we did this constitution, we wanted expenditure to move away from Nairobi to be found in Kakamega, to be found in Voi, to be found in Lamu. We wanted that thing to be in Murang'a. But instead, we are still
centralized.
We are centralized in terms of this. And what happens when a contractor from these far-flung places like Isiolo gets a tender to do the road because he has received it from a government that he can see tomorrow. That money goes directly into his pocket and into his neighbors. But because we've centralized this thing, I can guarantee you, the characters who are actually benefiting from the government procurement system, I can guarantee you, out of all the people who submit tenders, probably it's the same cabal of 10% of the people who submit that keeps getting these tenders financial year after financial year.
Well,
so there is marginalization that comes out of this. Now, the government has said, look, we are going to put an e-procurement system. Brilliant. Let's hope it's open and transparent. But I would prefer, and I think it's something that would be of a noble venture, if these monies were decentralized as was envisioned in the Constitution. Because if we did that, I guarantee you, the thing that you're asking about, can we put money in Kenyans' pockets, it would happen. But right now, a lot of money is being put in Nairobi. Even if I want to tender, I have to come and bring my tender documents to Nairobi. Imagine I have to panda SGR from my village to come and submit a tender document when actually, and the project is being done in my area. But because it's a national government project, my documents have to go all the way to Nairobi. These are the things that we need to change, and you can be told later that that's not conceptually true, but this is the case. And that's the dynamism that we need to change. So when we conceptualize this constitution, we expected more funds to go where they're needed, where people are. And government helps the economy and helps its people when it spends money. And if all the money is being spent in Nairobi, there's a problem. And that's why we are not seeing the trickle down that we expected from this country.
Very well. Yes, as you respond to what he's raising, and I know the issue of e-procurement, I mean, it started with the former president, I mean, Uhuru Kenyatta. He kept on talking about moving procurement from paper-based to online-based. It has not happened. Yes, you may argue some aspect of it has happened, but the whole point was to move it fully. I know President Ruto is also very passionate about ensuring that this process, goes online. I want you to tell us why is it so difficult, or why is this process taking too long? And also I want to hear from you. When you look, for example, information, communication, and technology, and we claim, or we boast, that we are the Silicon Savannah of Africa. But when you look at the allocation to ICT, it's only 13 billion Kenya shillings. This is the money that is supposed to make our government paperless, deliver e-services to the people, ensure that we deepen ICT infrastructure, at the constituency, at the ward level. And then we are allocating how much? Social protection and affirmative action, 43 billion shillings. Equity, poverty reduction, women and youth empowerment, 107 billion shillings. NGCDF, 53 billion shillings. Lekaram.
Yes, sir.
Are the maths mathing?
Yes, they are mathing. And just to clarify the budget process, the government does not just sit down and start allocating money in percentages, just like my friend said here. When we are developing the budget, including that of the judiciary, the registrar, or maybe in this case, the head of the judiciary, that is Lady Justice Martha Koome, will send his best officer to the relevant sector to go and actually say what they want to do. And these are called sector working groups. Yeah, they're called the medium-term expenditure framework sector working groups. For that sector, for example, we have the government, justice, law and order, and here you will find maybe the office of the ombudsman. You'll find the judiciary is there. You will find the office of the the public prosecutor, and all of them have a basket. And they haggle for these resources, and they come with the evidence, and they compete for the resources that have been allocated in that sector. So whatever you see has been allocated to a sector is actually an output of a process that is so meticulous. It is not just a random process. Yes.
And that fact is highly appreciated, because
that is, yes,
we know it happens.
Yes, and that is a good thing of having systems that work in government. So even if the judiciary deserves more money, then they should do a better job. next
It
time.
is up to them to demand
It
for
is
more.
up to them, yes, to ensure that they're able
I
to.
can bet you, Brad,
They're-
always demand for more. And
Yes.
they are told you have an envelope or a window that you can only borrow, you can actually request for this fund. So let's be honest, these people come with very serious figures and they're told, my friend, this is all you have available
Yes.
for you.
Actually, it's not.
That is how it goes.
No. You will find.
Have
You
you
will find.
ever been part of that process?
Yes, I
Yes,
know.
yes,
Let's
actually-
be honest.
So you're
Yes.
speaking from a point of experience.
Total experience.
Yes.
You know that
Have you ever been part of that
No, but
process?
you see, the membership is composed of even the judicial officers themselves. Yes, and they agree. Okay, this time they're supposed actually to agree themselves. This time, let's finish with the courts, and then maybe we'll do something to do maybe with the devolving the office of the prosecutor or something like this. They agree with themselves. So whatever comes out is actually largely based on what they've been able to actually defend within their sector. And then now we go now to the other sectors where we also haggle for resources. The resources are not easy to find in this government. So talking about procurement, well, this process started quite a while ago when we were doing IFMIS re-engineering. And
That was in 2018?
No, that was way further during, even when the current governor of Kirinyaga was the one in charge of the government re-engineering. That's when it started. So the current e-procurement has at least 26 steps in IFMIS just for e-procurement.
26?
At least 26 steps.
At least?
Yes. That includes, doing the requisitions, the invoicing, the delivery inspection,
It's a long and tedious process.
so many steps also integrated with the internet banking. And I can tell you most state departments have already embraced these steps. Only that now we are talking about 100% rollout. It's because we still have other
What
maybe
percentage
government
are we
agencies.
talking about now?
I think I think all state departments are already onboarded. What is remaining is the semi-autonomous government agencies that now have to come on board so that now we really roll out 100%. Yes, but also going to your question on whether we are investing in the youth and in infrastructure, especially the digital infrastructure. Well, the government is laying at least 100,000 kilometers of fiber using the National Fiber Optic program. And with this, it has created over 300 digital hubs known as Digitume centers. And here we are talking about skilling our youth. It does not end there. When you go to TVET, TVET has an allocation of 144 billion. Nobody is seeing this. And this includes, providing the right equipment, right infrastructure to ensure that our youth have the current skills that are required in the current times. So you will also realize, that hand in hand, we are talking about creation of jobs in other sectors, also to support, different sectors. We are talking about pumping in a lot of money in the housing sector. This is also targeting the youth because they will provide most for the workforce. 119 billion for the State Department for Housing, and this is largely funded, by the housing levy. But even when you look at these housing programs, you will realize they're just not standalone, construction of houses. You realize schools are being set up, markets are being set up, accompanying infrastructure. There'll be a lot of, lighting, a lot of training on how to manage this kind of infrastructure. And I think when you look at all that in whole, realize that yes, there's something for the youth, despite just looking at what has been allocated for the youth fund. 50% is being eaten. I don't think we're doing the right thing. Well, business incubation is one of the aspects that the State Department is really in charge of. TVET and also youth really needs to look at. You remember when we started the issue of Boda Boda. Boda Boda was largely, bicycles. You remember? And then these guys graduated later on to motorcycles, and now they're the ones still owning the Uber. You can see there's that process of gradually, changing and improving. So even for the business environment and for the youth specifically, then you realize that as the government invests in them, then there's still that process. We don't expect all the youths to be CEOs tomorrow of companies, but there has to be that gradual increase of capacity and also growth in the business environment.
When you attribute that to government, how is this so? I mean, look, and the border culture, I mean, goes back to 2005.
Yes.
When the late President Mwai Kibaki lowered the import fees on motorcycles.
Yes.
And we have seen this industry growing very fast. And but when you say this has been government's project, what exactly do you mean?
No, I'm not saying it's a government project. I was just trying to, I just wanted to bring to your attention that aspect of the incubation, of them growing, you know, with time. You know, we started from somewhere.
Growing has been organic.
Organic, exactly. Yes, same for the business industries. I mean, and the ventures that the youth are getting into right now. A lot of startups, a lot of digital platforms that the youth are embracing right now. They still have to grow organically.
And the question that I was asking was this: I mean, when you look at, you know, the allocation to the ICT sector, and this is critical. It's a critical industry. I mean, it's the future, you know. But when you look at the allocation, we are talking about 13 billion Kenya shillings. Are we really expecting a lot of returns from this industry when one would say that we are under-investing in this industry?
Well, you see, you cannot just look at it at the figure alone. You really have to look at the statistics. We're talking about, you know, national coverage of around 87%.
Of what?
Of mobile network. 87% mobile network.
Well, that has been achieved.
That is by the private sector, and of course, part of it, the government, you know. But you don't look at it in a way that you say that if we pump in money, we're going to get results. The thing is, really, what we are looking at is to ensure that we can connect people with very high speeds of internet and you know, data connectivity, to ensure that the businesses can get the support of you know, this the national optical fiber network, especially to do transactions much faster. At the same time, the State Department of ICT is also investing a lot, or has earmarked to invest a lot on data. On you know, cybersecurity issues and data protection, to ensure that there is credible, that the country can do credible transactions which are safe and secure over the internet.
Helen, I want to hear this from you. I mean, when you look at the projected revenue, you're talking about, is it 2.2 trillion Kenya shillings, you know, from Kenya Revenue Authority? And when you look at the amount that will go towards the development vote, you're looking at 28% of the total expenditure. I know the Public Finance Management Act, you know, talks about at least 30%, and we are not even yet. We haven't achieved this. When you look at the counties, that is where the situation is even worse. Most counties are spending less than 6% of the allocation to development, and I know the county public management fund, you know, also talks about at least 15%. Then how do we empower counties to ensure that they also pump in a lot of money, because they are spending a significant chunk of their resources on recurrent expenditure?
Well, that's a very, very good question, and it has been the topic of discussion. How do we empower counties to be self-empowered, you know? Because we are seeing a lot of money going into recurrent expenditure, you know, and counties complaining that they are not receiving enough for development. You know, we are hearing very few, like 6% you've said, going into counties, and a lot of it going into recurrent expenditure. But the question that I think we should be asking ourselves is instead of focusing on the national revenue cake, how can we empower counties to self-generate revenue to run their recurrent, to run their programs, you know? How, and this has also been discussed severally, how do we empower ministries, how do we empower departments and agencies to raise revenue so that we are not dependent solely on the national cake? And that again brings me back to your first statement. A lot of this expenditure is going to be financed by tax revenue, right?
Yeah.
But again, we all know that Kenya we're already paying a lot of taxes, you know? So where is this money going to come from? Are we going to keep digging in the pockets of individuals, in the pockets of businesses to fund this expenditure? How else can we raise funds outside debt? Without necessarily having to tap into the citizens' pocket to raise. Because I hear a lot of discussions about what should be allocated to ICT, is that enough? What should be allocated to judiciary, is that enough, you know? And a lot of general statements that we should be allocating a lot more to this because they do this. But the question that we should be asking ourselves is, whatever they have been allocated, as little as it is it enough to drive growth? Is it enough to drive development? ICT, for instance, has been allocated the 13 billion. But when you look critically at what they are going to spend it for, is the 13 billion even more than what we need? Are they able to raise revenue on their own, you know, to drive their business activities, you know? Because I'm very concerned in a case where we're looking at, and especially you've seen with the finance bill where they're trying to impose VAT on items that were previously exempt, you know, like health medicaments, you know, pharmaceutical products, housing, you know, when you construct, they're trying to impose VAT on those, which essentially will increase more taxes for government. But at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, are we in a deficit position? Do we have more expenditure that needs to be financed through taxes, or can we raise this funding ourselves? And for counties, for me, I know that county governments have ability to generate revenue on their own through levies, you know, that they normally charge, which would be sufficient for them to engage in development expenditure. But that is not, again, moving away from the fact that we still depend on national government for some of these functions. So in my opinion, we should be looking at ways to raise more revenue as opposed to always depending on the national budget on an annual basis for allocations, you know. We should move away from this narrative of we are waiting to receive, we want to receive, because if we can self-empower, or rather if we can empower the systems themselves to raise their revenue, then I think we would be at a better trajectory than we are at the moment, you know. So those are my thoughts on that.
When you look at, you know, out of the 4.3 trillion shillings, you know, the government is projecting to spend in the next 12 months, about 800 billion shillings will have to be borrowed, you know, because we don't have it, and we cannot raise those resources internally. Do we really need to rethink the issue of internal and external borrowing through budget rationalization?
Yes, definitely. I mean, because we have, okay, personally, I believe that we have enough resources, or even if we don't have, the county can, or rather the country can raise enough resources to fund budget expenditure. We do not need to factor in debt as part of our revenue raising strategies, because our debt is already high enough, you know. When we look at these allocations, you know, we are seeing education, let me not touch on education, but we are seeing the roads having 190 billion, housing 119 billion, you know. And remember, these are just estimates, right? These are not actual expenses that are going to be incurred. And if this money is released, there's high chances of wastage of these funds. So what we really need to look at are, we have been allocated, let's say, for example, the judiciary has the 26 billion. Is that too much for the judiciary? Can that amount go lower so that we do not have to resort to borrowing so that we raise or we meet this financial deficit? Is the revenue that we are collecting from taxes, from levies, from a county level to national level sufficient for us to fund our systems without necessarily, you know, corrupting the service provider? And the answer is yes. When we look at the actual spending that would be incurred, I think our revenue expenditure would be sufficient, at least not now, but if we plan ourselves now in the near future for us to fund. Look at the interest rates that are very, very high. They contribute to this particular budget because we have to factor them when we are preparing the budget. You know, we have to say how we are going to finance it, and it's a huge chunk of money. So the more we borrow, the more we are going to be increasing our budget year on year. And the aim for us as a country should be to reduce this debt expenditure. Let's not always resort to borrowing. Let's see, you know, actually even in households, when there is no money, people do cuts, right? So why don't we employ that as a country, you know? Does Parliament need all that money? Does ICT need all that money? Let it not just be looking at the allocations that different sectors have been given, but seeing even this little that you have been given, is it more than what you need? What are you going to spend it on? And again, that brings us to the discussion about Kenyans are not seeing. We are saying housing will get this, we are saying people will get this, but on the ground, are we seeing the benefit of these allocations? Is the common mwananchi mama mboga who's sitting there seeing the benefit of these allocations? And again, that also again brings us into another conversation about monitoring, evaluation, accountability, all those words. And if we critically go to those core items, then you'll find that we really don't need to factor debt in our budget. We don't need to go out to get funding. I know right now it's a bit difficult, but if we restructure our budgeting processes to only focus on the core items and reduce the planned expenditure, then I think we should be heading in the right direction.
Mokesi, I want you to talk about this. I mean, when you look at total revenue projection is at 17.2% of GDP, and an increase of 18% over the medium term. Total expenditures are expected at 22% of GDP. So, which means that we are spending more than we are earning. If this was a business, if Kenya was a business, then it will go bust. It will just collapse because there's no way you're spending more than you're earning. If Kenya was a person, they would be declared bankrupt because your expenditure is more than what you are earning. How should we deal with this animal of spending more and living beyond our means, which is really affecting our budget deficit as well as our debt position?
Brian, I think this is a global economy problem, and these bad manners are transferred from other world economies. And you'll find most developed countries have been touting this mantra that you can run a government on a deficit. This is happening in the US, it's happening in Japan, it's happening everywhere.
But those are big economies.
And this is the conversation
which can print money.
That our presidents in Africa go to these meetings and are told it's okay to run a government on deficit. But literally, when you look at some of these economies and how they sustain themselves in the long term, they might be running a deficit, but they're investing in sectors that in the long term, 10 to 15 years, there's a projected return on that investment. And this is what I'm saying. Every single time we look at this animal called the budget, we need to ask ourselves, are our policymakers actually investing in the things that will turn around this economy so that we move into a net surplus in terms of what we actually are making as a country? And those are the investments that are completely questionable. Now, one tragedy that I'm noticing is that we've reduced the expenditure on agriculture, right? We put a lot of expenditure when Beta was coming in, and the idea was if we put a lot of money in this, we'll reap more. Yeah, and God was good. Now, the funny thing about Kenya is that we get good days and bad days. So when you put in money, say for fertilizer, and then you have a good day called rain, you suddenly walk around and say, as a country, we're doing well. But we are depending on factors that are completely beyond our control. And I'm telling you this, O'Brien, some of the projections that this administration has for the economy, right, and the ability to actually jumpstart the economy and grow, and the growth that they're projecting is predicated on rain. So the moment this rain fails, Kina Victor here will be asking themselves very hard questions. Where exactly do they get this money? Secondly, we're also running a country hoping that the price of oil doesn't go up. Because if the price of oil goes up a little bit, we are in the red again. Thirdly, we are running this administration on the hopes that the world economy does not create a crisis to the extent that our loans become impossible to get should we ever want to go to the market. There is another monster that we are doing in this country called domestic financing of our deficits. And that is, we go to, CBK goes to the market and says, I'm going to issue bonds and you're going to come in. Now, the Treasury has said out of fiscal responsibility, they will say, we are going to look for longer maturities and not shorter maturities. Good plan. However, we are still entertaining the thought that we will still fund this deficit by borrowing from the local market. That's a big no-no. And it's been a problem. The government has said, we have reduced the central bank lending rate from 13% to 10%. So, cost of credit for private sector in Kenya there'll be a higher uptake. There has been some little bit of shift, but it's not enough. The problem that is really plaguing this country is that a farmer seated in Kwale, a farmer seated in Murang'a, a farmer seated in Githunguri cannot be able to get loans that can be able to sustain their farming business. And because of why? The government is over-borrowing, is taking too much of the money circulation. Because these banks, instead of lending to Kamau and Otieno and Moshigadi, they are now putting that money
investing in government
securities. And this is why we're doing all this upside down. We need to be very intentional about the plans that we are making to ensure that if we're investing, say, for example, in ICT, and I'll tell you something, O'Brien, from that budget, the amount of money being put in ICT, especially in Konza, and for expanding digital access, connectivity to schools, to TVETs, I laud the government. That one, I give them an A+. But we must make sure that concurrently, we are putting as much effort in training people in this ICT space. Why am I saying this? The world economy is changing. If your ICT skills are those ones for opening windows and Word and printing a document, you are going to be a dinosaur in the coming future. In 10 years, you will be relevant.
Irrelevant.
Completely irrelevant. And this administration needs to take that into consideration. We need as many young people to be literate in ICT as possible, as the way we learn maths or English, because it will be the only currency that we actually sell to the world. Remember, I'm repeating again, Kenya exports a lot of services, whether knowledge-based, whether what we are servicing other economies, like Ernst & Young is doing to the rest of the region in terms of accounting services and things like those. That's what is our gold standard. So we should not play around with how much we're investing in the knowledge economy of this country. If we play around with that, if we chew the money that is meant to go to our students in university, our students in TVETs, and we play around with that money to do silly things like, constructing toilets so that we can take our 10%, we are robbing the future. So my thought, and when I look at this budget, because it's literally done, but what we can say in a show like this is to empower a policymaker seated when they are going to be interrogating that budget, to which sectors of the economy should we put more fuel into. And I'm saying that needs to go into education. That needs to go into agriculture. We are performing poorly in agriculture. Like, I will tell you this for a fact. The amount of money that is being spent by the European economies, the US and China, in the agricultural sectors, they will have no need for our exports. So while we might be happy saying that we're exporting flowers, we're exporting... In fact, when you look at the budget policy statement and the budget summary that was submitted by Treasury, we have listed all manner of things, sunflowers, oils, which we are going to be sending to soybeans and all these things we are going to be exporting. I guarantee you, while we are bragging that we're exporting this for this financial year and next financial year, those same economies are actually making sure they're shutting down the need for imports from this country like Kenya. So we need to get serious on how we feed our own country. And we need to put a lot more money in terms of putting technology, putting the know-how and capacity in terms of our agricultural economy, and also encourage a lot more young people to look at agriculture as a viable sector because it's a thriving sector. It's feeding this country as we speak right now.
I remember,
so if you have more tech people going into that, more lawyers going into that, more accountants looking directly at agriculture and how to make it more sustainable for this country, you'll have an easier job of financing this deficit and will be a net surplus country. But we need to be thinking along those lines. We are not. We are thinking about how much. In fact, when you look at the document submitted by the National Treasury, there are 3 volumes for development expenditure. Volume 1, Volume 2, and Volume 3. The whole of Volume 2 is roads. It's fine. It's good. But remember, the contractors, 3/4 of them will be Chinese. So that money is going back to China. We need to really recalibrate. In as much as I say, let's build the roads. Roads are needed by farmers. Roads are needed by, but let's make this infrastructure targeted at sectors that are helping to drive this economy. Let's make the price of this infrastructure manageable, right? And let's make it in such a manner that it benefits the local contractor rather than the foreign contractor. When you do this, O'Brien, you will not need to call me for next year to do a show here, because economy we will start discussing how do we spend the money. You will call a wealth advisor here on how to chew your money.
I want to hear this from Lekaram, because I can also see that we are almost coming to the tail end of this conversation. I remember there was a statement that the former Minister of Finance, David Moiraria, the late, made. And he said at that time that it was high time that we started running our economy as a business. If you invest a shilling, you expect returns on it. Lekaram, we are investing 4.3 trillion shillings in the Kenyan economy. How much do we expect by the time we close the financial year in 2026?
Yes. From the economic survey that was just released, last year we invested almost a similar amount.
3.9?
Yes, 4 trillion, let me just put it at 4 trillion. And from that 4.0 trillion, the size of our GDP was around 15 trillion. Now, just by investing that, the size of the GDP has also increased by almost another 1.2 trillion, according to the latest results that were just released this week. By the
so we invested let's say 4.
4, yeah.
And then we have realized a growth of 1.2.
Yes. But really, that is not how you look at it. That is not the right way to look at it. But that's just like from a layman point of view. You can say that already there's some growth. The devil is in the details. And I'd like to take us back to the finance bill, just a little, just to understand what the government is doing to address a lot of things that, we've been losing money as a government. One of them was, which is quite hot, and that is, moving items from a zero-rated regime to, a tax-exempt regime. You realize that per year, this money that we are talking about, this 4 trillion, part of it, 500 billion actually is for VAT refunds. You know what that means? It means somebody sells you bread, at 65 shillings, for example, 60 shillings. And then after you go with your bread, the same guy goes back to the government and said, I've sold somebody bread, I need some more money here. So we're actually paying somebody 500 billion just because they sold you or gave you, some goods. So the government has sat down, we've looked at the maths, it's not mathing. Because we also expect that the same person is also investing or putting the same money back into the economy. And it's very easy to see that, there's a lot of tax leakages.
Yeah.
And this money that...
You want to interject?
This money, this money that is tax refunds, actually, is not money that the government is getting from any other place. It's money that the government is also getting from the same taxpayer. It's money that should have gone to roads. It's money that should have gone to what my friend was talking about, retooling and providing the right infrastructure for the youth. It is the same money. So what the government is doing is trying to eliminate some of these tax loopholes. And you can already see, even from the, from the books, the budget books, you can already see there's this 500 billion already, which is not, is like an extra income for the government. Yes.
Gentlemen and a lady, I mean, we're coming to the close of this conversation, and I want to give the two of you a minute each to make your final interjections and you close. And I'll start with Ake.
Thanks, O'Brien. And maybe I can just speak on what Victor has said in terms of the VAT refund. This is not a favor that government is giving to taxpayers, you know. The main reason for zero rating goods and services is to make the final product more affordable to consumers. And when government zero rates this service, it means this person has incurred some input VAT to produce this particular product, right? And now, instead of passing on that tax onto the consumer, the government is now saying you can actually apply for a refund for that VAT that you paid so that you do not overburden the consumer. The issue of bread is the simplest in this discussion. If the government was to tax bread, it put 16% VAT on bread, that particular cost will be passed on to the mwananchi, which will make that product more expensive than it is. And we are grappling with another very serious problem where medicaments that were actually initially exempt are now being proposed to tax. As a business, you cannot incur this cost yourself. You have to pass it on to the next person. So what do you expect will happen? The cost of the products will increase. So it is not a favor that the government is doing Kenyans by allowing them to actually claim this tax. And that is a narrative that we really, really need to correct in the market. The issue is not the refund. The issue is on the time it takes to process these refunds, because again, cash is key. So it is actually a legal right to businesses to claim that refund. And the reason we are having a lot of backlogs is because of the time that it takes for the government to process such refunds. And that's why we are seeing a lot of tax expenditure in that regard. But anyway, as a parting shot, I would say for us, increasing taxes or removing tax expenditure might really not be the solution for us as a country. And the goal should actually be the reverse, to reduce taxes. Because once you reduce taxes, business have more and individuals have more disposable income to channel back into the economy, which then would drive. But currently, because we are keeping on increasing taxes, the business environment in Kenya is not favorable for guys who want to invest into the country. It becomes
unpredictable.
It becomes very unpredictable and stop. So we really need to rethink the tax strategies that we have, focus really more on reducing taxes and driving business growth, so that in turn we are able to finance our country on our own. So that would be my comment on that.
In a minute.
Very quickly, 2025 was the year of the finance bill, and Kenyans were very apprehensive about the finance bill and the taxes it wanted to impose. 2024 was the year of the finance bill. 2025 will be the year where Kenyans want to see serious measures to tame expenditures. And that is contained in the appropriations bill that the parliament will pass. So it's important, when this budget is given to parliamentarians and the various departments of parliament go through each and every one of these books and budget lines, they actually do what Americans are doing right now. Trump gave Elon Musk the duty to cut government expenditure.
The Doge.
What we expect of the National Assembly is to be the Doge for Kenya. Cut these expenditures from 2.4 trillion and give us something less than that. Make sure every wasteful expenditure is completely trimmed from the national budget. And when you do that, what will happen? You will free up money. And we can use this money to do the most honorable thing that this administration can do in this financial year, and that is pay pending bills. As we speak, they've said they have looked at 500 billion worth of pending bills. They have only cleared 200 million, of which 80 is going to roads. But there are a lot of Kenyans who are suffering. So let the National Assembly trim all the wastage that is in this budget, and let's appropriate money to pay off Kenyans who are saddling under the debt of pending bills that are choking Kenyans and are choking this economy. If we do that, then this Appropriation Act of 2025 will be the best gift that William Ruto can give to the Kenyans in this administration.
Lekaram.
As a parting shot, I'd just like to assure the nation that the government is on top of things. First and foremost, we have a very comprehensive budget that looks at issues to do with healthcare to ensure that we have a working nation that does not have an economic burden on illness. We have a lot of support in key economic sectors like agriculture, tourism, and trade and manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, looking at it, there's been concerted effort, especially to support the independent institutions like the judiciary to ensure that we can address issues of governance, encouraging transparency and eliminating corruption.
Very good.
So with that, I think we are here. Things are improving in the economy. The cost of borrowing is going down. The price of tea and coffee has gone up. Agriculture productivity is at its highest in a very long time. And all these things are because of fundamental issues that we are doing to address the macroeconomic situation in the country. So with that, I think we are yet to improve, but things are looking up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, thank you, gentlemen and lady, for joining us this morning, and of course for sharing those insights with us. Your time is highly appreciated.
Thank you.
I mean, it's not all gloom and doom. I mean, there's some light at the end of the tunnel. And of course, we must all direct our energies to building a better Kenya and, of course, wishing a beautiful Kenya. My name is O'Brien Kimani. Thank you very much indeed. You have been watching BizCheck live from Broadcasting House. Kurunzi Mashinani is coming up next with Kasichana Masha. Thank you for your time.